People are still watching, commenting, and talking about what's that one best meal to clear your arteries. Now, does that meal even exist? Maybe. But can one meal reduce your arterial plaque to zero? That's impossible. You just can't achieve that. But how about stabilizing plaque? Yes, almost every one of us can practically expect to stabilize our plaque. And if we do, the risk is very little, just a tiny bit more than having no plaque at all. And that's about as close as you can get. But that's enough because you're taking over 90% of the risk off the table. But back to the meal. What is that meal? Well, again, it is the lack of a meal. Fasting. Yep, you heard that right. Fasting. But how you fast carries some challenges, like what is the best type of fasting? Can you eat or drink something during your fast? Should you fast for a couple of hours, couple of days, weeks? Some people have done it for months. What about those diets that mimic fasting? Do those really work? And what about the controversies? Oh yes, I know. There are prominent health influencers right now saying fasting's actually a bad idea. Have you heard the new buzzword for longevity? Autophagy. It's been around for years, at least a decade. But what exactly is autophagy and why is it important? Is it worth starving yourself to clean out your arteries and to reach autophagy? And if that's the case, is autophagy really the mechanism that cleans your arteries? Or is it just a calorie thing? We're going to be answering all those questions in this video. And we're going to do it in a quick and simple way so that you have the information you need to decide for yourself whether fasting's right for you. I'm Dr. Ford Brewer. I'm a preventive medicine physician. I used to run the prevention program, the preventive medicine program at Johns Hopkins. I've got over 40 years of experience in preventing heart attacks and strokes. And yes, I've done the other side of medicine too. I used to be an ER doc. That's what got me into prevention. Why am I saying that fasting can clean your arteries? It starts with one simple process called autophagy. Now, autophagy, well, maybe it's not that simple, but let's break it down and it becomes clearer. Autophagy literally means self-eating. You break it down. Auto means self and phage means to eat. It is a more complex process. Cells are able to break down old proteins, molecules, and what we call organelles, portions or parts of the cell. The classic one is mitochondria. Why mitochondria? Because mitochondria are so important in the cell. They're like a furnace, the energy factory of the cell. And like any furnace that's 40, 50, 60, 70 years old, you can see some breakdown there. And in fact, with the chemical processes going on in there, you could see some leakage and not good things coming out of it. Anyhow, more about that later. Think about renovating your house, but instead of throwing away the broken bricks, glass, wood, you recycle them. You put them back together and use it to create a totally new house, a better house. It's a renewal process. That's why autophagy's been linked to longevity. Cleaning out old cells and creating new, more efficient cells, or at least cleaning out old cell organelles and creating new, more efficient ones is what this is all about. And guess what causes the process to happen? You guessed it, fasting. Now, when you fast, you're putting your body into, you can say a survival mode, you can say stress, but it's the kind of stress similar to exercise for your muscles that helps you to grow stronger. It helps your cells to grow stronger, which makes your tissue grow stronger. Getting rid of old proteins, old cell organelles, and molecules and creating new ones is what this is all about. This happens in basically all the cells of your body, but more in the metabolically active cells. For example, the liver. Autophagy in the liver triggers fat burning. Now, you might be asking, what does this process have to do with cleaning out your arteries? In order to answer that, we need to get this part straight. Clogged arteries and arterial plaque are not just caused by cholesterol. There is cholesterol in there, but it is not the main problem. Yes, I'm going to say that again. There is cholesterol in the plaque, but the cholesterol is not the main problem. There's an even deeper problem. It's called cardiovascular inflammation. Cardiovascular inflammation's like having a fire inside the walls of your arteries, and it's actually friendly fire, meaning it's not coming from a foreign enemy, an outside threat. It's actually coming from your own body. Your immune cells, the ones that are supposed to protect you, are trying to do exactly that. But in the process, they're creating havoc and chaos within your artery walls. It's similar to pus or snot. It's filled with those immune cells, and we call it hot inflammatory plaque. And it can rupture. If it ruptures and touches the blood, that causes a clot. If the clot's big enough and it goes to the heart, it's a heart attack. If that clot is big enough and it goes to the brain, it's a stroke. This is more of an event type of activity. That's also why you really cannot predict the timing of a heart attack. If it were a waxy buildup, you could predict it, but you can't. How does autophagy help with all of that? Well, there are two main ways. First, the autophagy process happens in all cells, including immune cells. So by triggering autophagy with fasting, those immune cells in your arteries start to calm down because they're now in the process of autophagy themselves. They're their mitochondria that are not working well. They're using them for energy. They become less and less active in terms of inflammation. The second way is depriving your body from a major cause of cardiovascular inflammation. Carbs, carbohydrates. Yep, they are a major cause of cardiovascular inflammation. When you eat a lot of carbs, or even moderate amounts of processed carbs, you get increased blood glucose and increased insulin. Both, either one, can trigger inflammation within your vessels, causing more of that hot liquid in your artery walls. But by fasting, you keep your body from absorbing carbs, and you keep your pancreas from producing excess insulin. You stop putting wood on the fire. But here's the question. How long should I fast? What kind of fast should I do? Well, let's first talk about how long you should fast. And even a 5-hour fast does have positive impact. But the right balance is probably somewhere between 14 hours and 2 to 4 weeks. So as you can see, even fasting's not that simple. Even just the simple question of how long you should fast. We'll talk more about that, about how and when to fast. If you're still skeptical, you might be thinking, if autophagy is such a great thing for living longer, and fasting is great for that, why don't we just fast all day, every day? Well, that's just like a lot of things in life. You got to have balance. And like the old Rally commercial, you got to eat. Excess autophagy can lead to significant cell destruction without enough recycling. So it's not a magic strategy to just do all the time. Autophagy is more like a tool. And tools, one of the most important things to learn about tools, we talked about that back in the aspirin video. One of the most important things to learn about a tool is when not to use it. So let's talk about types of fasting and what are the best types to reach autophagy to clean arteries. With ADF, or alternate day fasting, you can eat unrestrictedly one day and fast the next. MADF, modified alternate day fasting, allows for different variations. For example, eating unrestricted one day and on the other day have some sort of fasting where you just eat less calories. Here's another version of MADF, modified alternate day fasting. On this one, you say, okay, water fast today, 1 meal a day on the second day, or OMAD. That is a very powerful type of pattern. I've got tons of patients that have come to me that are in the process or have already lost 30, 50, 80, and over 100 pounds using this method. 1 meal a day, every other day, with alternate days on fasting. Now, there's a lot of people like me, for example, I don't need to lose 100 pounds. Like we said, fasting is not so simple. You need to think through what you need and what the timing is that makes sense for you. Let's go back to the other end of the scale, time-restricted eating, TRE. It involves fasting from 12, usually 23, 22 hours each day. Here's another option, prolonged fasting. It can be done with water only. A water fast, you can do it with other things like a sardine fast, like Dr. Boz likes to do. Or Walter Longo has a fasting mimicking diet. But in order to be considered a prolonged fast, let's make sure we define that first. You have to go for at least 24 hours. What does the literature say? There is an umbrella review on fasting. It showed that any type of intermittent fasting will have clear benefits in multiple bioindicators. Intermittent fasting has been shown in the umbrella review and therefore plenty of studies that it decreases waist circumference, body fat, LDL cholesterol, if you have concern about that. It decreases triglycerides, fasting insulin, blood pressure, and it increases HDL cholesterol and fat-free mass. All of these are significant positive markers. They'll lead to arterial plaque reversal or at least stabilization, which is what you need. Because of ethical considerations, research in prolonged fasting is hard to find. But I have a couple of examples for you. Here's the first one. A recent paper reports a 64-year-old male with significant heart disease, heart failure, diabetes, and obesity. He underwent a 50-day water fast. He lost 50 pounds, and his hemoglobin A1C went from 10.3 to 8.3. I have to tell you, that was really my biggest surprise when we looked at this study. I would have expected it to go far, far lower. Unfortunately, we don't have more information about changes in his arterial plaque. In this case, we have a big warning to anyone who starts considering prolonged fasting, clearly that the type of prolonged fasting that he did. If you don't recover electrolytes, if you don't keep electrolytes, if you don't supply your body with electrolytes, you have a lot of risk with fasting. You know, there's some recent information coming out about dry fasting. You see a couple of YouTube content creators talking about how much more effective dry fasting is. That's really where other YouTube creators, and myself included, would say, be very careful doing dry fasting. Be very careful replacing your electrolytes. Low potassium can increase heart rhythm problems, and they can be fatal. Additional dehydration, even kidney failure, comes with loss of sodium, and you just feel terrible if you lose too much magnesium. Sodium, potassium, magnesium, these are all very important, and they are the electrolytes that you need to keep an eye on if you're doing fasting, especially prolonged fasting. If you want to review this with a medical provider that understands fasting and you don't have one, again, it probably is a good idea, at least the first few times that you fast. If your provider doesn't understand it, you can call our group, 859-721-1414. Now, the second example, remember that was just one example of prolonged fasting. The second example is Biosphere II. You remember that? That was way back over 20 years ago. It was headed up by Roy Walford. You know, you may or may not remember who he is, and you may or may not connect the dots. He was the faculty advisor for Walter Longo, the guy doing the fasting mimicking diet, Prolon. Roy Walford, the Biosphere II. It was a big terrarium built way out in the desert in Arizona. He and a group, Tabor McCallum, Dennis Mock, Roy Verdery, they published an article that described what happened with severe caloric restriction, about 2 years of it, or significant caloric restriction. This included 4 females, 4 males Walford and McCallum were included in the group. During 7/8 of that time, they consumed 1,750 to 2,100 calories per day. That sounds like a lot, right? Well, they did eat what most would consider nutrient-dense foods. They were all plant-based because they were in that terrarium without animals. It included 77% complex carbohydrates. So even though there was a 77% component of complex carbohydrates, they lost in the first month 17% of their weight on average. That's a lot. They had a decrease in blood pressure, a decrease in blood cell count, a decrease in insulin, a decrease in thyroid hormones, and decrease in lipids, cholesterols. I even have a third example. Me. I reversed 20 years of arterial plaque in about a year, and I've kept that progress up until present day. A part of that journey did involve fasting. About 6 months ago, I did another fast. It was a 5-day water fast. I lost 10 pounds in 5 days. I didn't do a lot of exercise because I'm not that seasoned at prolonged fasting. You really need to be very, very experienced at prolonged fasting if you do any more than just walking. Yes, I did plenty of walking, but that's about it. Doing exercise in the midst of a prolonged fast can really amp up the stress. So let's go back to mine. I lost 10 pounds, 5-day water fast, and then I started refeeding. Now, my goal was not to lose weight. I had a weight of about 160, circumference of my belly of 33 at my belly button. I just wanted to improve my metabolism. I lost 10 pounds. Obviously, most of that's going to come from water weight, glycogen in the liver, and glycogen in the muscles. What happened after I refed? Within 2 weeks of refeeding, I had started my exercises again. And these are aggressive exercises for a 67-year-old. A 60-pound rigorous sled pull, a 4-mile run with HIIT on it, and the HIIT is about 8 different hill sprints, a lot of resistance training. And so, again, within 2 weeks, I was back up to the 160 and then 162. But my belly circumference, it was still at the lower amount of 32, not 33. So the point being is, I gained my muscle back and then some after that 5-day water fast. So as a personal experience, yes, I lost immediate muscle, but again, water in the muscle. Within 2 weeks, I had more of it than I had prior to the fast. So you remember I talked about Walter Longo and the fasting mimicking diet? Let's go back to that for a minute. The fasting mimicking diet that Walter Longo talks about is low calories. So the first of the 5 days, you're like 1,200 calories. Then days 2 through 5, you're 700 to 800 calories. This is moderate to low protein, low fat, very low fat, and high carb, complex plant-based carbs. This is a plant-based diet. It's supposed to mimic the effects of prolonged fasting. When you look at it and you're somebody like me, I monitored my blood sugar when I did those. I did, about a half dozen of these. And then I started monitoring my blood sugar and found that when I would do those soups, like the tomato soup, my blood sugar would go up to like 170, 180. I don't think that was necessarily that caused that much injury. I'd just go out and take a walk. But let's go back and talk about the studies. Studies in adult males and females, humans, that concluded a fasting mimicking diet was at least as good as the Mediterranean diet to decrease insulin resistance and slightly better to keep or even gain muscle. So again, more examples of decreasing calories during a fasting episode and maintaining or even gaining muscle. I mentioned my blood sugars going up. That's when I heard Dr. Boz talking about a sardine fast. So I started doing kipper fasts as opposed to Prolon. So kippers gave me more oil and more protein, and they didn't spike my blood sugars. Now, Let's go back. Let's talk about something else, fasting and cardiovascular health. In an abstract presented at an American Heart Association summit this year, it states that intermittent fasting increases the risk of cardiovascular death by 91%. Wait a minute. Didn't you hear sort of like the scratched record kind of thing? Let me repeat this. In an abstract presented at the American Heart Association summit this year, it stated that intermittent fasting can increase the risk of cardiovascular death by 91%. Well, you see my eyes rolling and you see the nonverbals here. The reality is that these types of publications are often full of flaws. You remember we've discussed multiple times Dr. John Ioannidis at Stanford. He published one of the articles that's the most downloaded article in PLOS, the Public Library of Science. It's titled, "Most Studies Are Wrong." And he goes into a whole lot of really good analysis, pointing out that you really should be careful what you read in terms of science. The peer review process to publish a paper like the one we just mentioned, stating that intermittent fasting increases the risk of cardiovascular death, it was a paper at a summit. The peer review process is just not very strict. Speaking of peer review, it's better for publications, but you know from multiple videos that we've done, you've got to be careful of publications as well. The peer review process is better to get into published journals, and it's better for some journals than others. But, we've talked about even some of the top journals in medicine, like the New England Journal, have let some stuff go through that they should regret. So again, think through anything that you read in terms of, quote, science. And let's go back to an item that I brought up earlier, muscle loss. Peter Attia, Rhonda Patrick, they said recently they don't skip breakfast anymore. I agree with that. And I agree with most of what both of them say, not all. Breakfast is important. If you're going to do intermittent fasting, you're better to skip dinner, not breakfast. I could go down that bunny hole of talking about breakfast and the social components of it and the social components of dinner, the value of the two. Let's move on. We've only got so much time on this video. Let's go to one of the most important items in terms of this process and in terms of the title, the meal to clean your arteries or to stabilize your plaque. How does prolonged fasting fit with metabolic reset? What is a metabolic reset anyway? It's pushing your metabolism into autophagy, giving you a boost, getting you adapted to fat burning, and then keeping you in a healthy, low-carb lifestyle. Is the benefit from autophagy or is it from caloric restriction? In a recent claim, Dr. Brad Stanfield, on one of his videos, states the evidence supports the idea that benefits from fasting come from caloric restriction, not autophagy. Again, I'm not going there yet. I think the evidence is not strong enough to say that the only reason, even if you think fasting is only about caloric restriction, that the only reason is calorie restriction, that autophagy is not making an impact. Again, we've had Nobel Prizes won over the deep science associated with understanding time-restricted eating and autophagy. I do believe this. When you're not fasting, it's important to get the most micronutrients that your body needs, or maybe not the most, the correct balance, the correct amount of micronutrients. And with some of the restrictive diets that you see out there, they can be good for helping you manage carbs, which can be poisonous to some people if you have insulin resistance. Be careful with the restrictive diets to make sure you're getting the right micronutrients. You can track this information and avoid making vital mistakes. Now, additionally, if you're very thin, like a BMI 20 or less, consider strongly how you do fasting, especially prolonged fasting, things that will often result in significant weight loss. Not getting enough micronutrients can actually be harmful. So again, and as we mentioned before, loss and failure to replace electrolytes is a very, very big deal. So regardless of the type of diet you follow, how many calories you're eating, I recommend using tools like Cronometer. It's an app, and no, they didn't sponsor this video. They don't sponsor us at all. It's a way to track your macronutrients. There are others out there as well, and they're getting better and better each year. Back in the old days, I had to do it with a paper pocket book, a little book about this size that you kept in your back pocket. Now you've got software that's better and better. Now, this way you can know the type of foods you need to include and what supplements to consider.
So Jesus and I just reviewed the final cut of this video. We noticed something was missing. What's my clear recommendation? So here we go. I believe intermittent fasting, and especially prolonged fasting, they have to be individualized decisions. In general, I believe most people benefit from a fasting period of about 16 hours to trigger autophagy. You don't have to do that every day. I don't. I also recommend prolonged fasting, 24 hours a day or more. Other types of fasts, like sardine fasting, are helpful. I use a kipper fast because I just don't like sardines. Now, it does help to have a few weeks or even months of low-carb or ketogenic diet, plus some form of intermittent fasting. It helps to have your body fat adapted, because when you go fasting, here's what you're doing. It's like you're switching fuel tanks yet again. So our body does know how to switch fuel tanks from carbs to fat, and fat in our diet to fat in our body. We just need to exercise it a little bit, and that's a little bit of stress, just like any other type of exercise. Here's the thing that I feel most strongly about in all of this. Never try prolonged fasting without preparation. Watch out for things like electrolytes. To find out more info, check the description of this video. We have over 20 references for you. Check those regarding fasting and cardiovascular health.
Now you know a lot more about fasting, the evidence that backs it up, and how it can actually help you stabilize or clean your arteries, at least stabilize your plaque, and therefore accomplish what so many of us want to do: take the risk of heart attack and stroke off the table. If you'd like more information about how to prepare for a fast, again, as I said, we've got several resources for you. One of the big ones here is this video with Dr. Boz.